Hello, my name is Abebe Negash. On behalf of Ethiopian Hearts for Peace and African Hearts, I present to you Eritrean perspective in the ever and endless conflict with Ethiopia. You see, Eritrea's voice in the long story of separation and conflict with Ethiopia is one that has often been pushed aside, misunderstood, or dismissed as inconvenient. Yet, if peace is not if peace is to be found, their perspective must be fully heard, because without hearing both sides, no reconciliation will stand. Eritreans trace their claim to sovereignty back to history itself. Unlike Ethiopia, which fought for foreign domination but never fell to colonization, Eritrea was under Italian rule beginning in the late 19th century. Ethiopia couldn't win all wars in Eritrean land. The Italians imposed their system, built infrastructure, and left scars of division that remained long after their defeat in World War II. When Italy fell, Eritrea did not simply flow back to Ethiopian arms. Instead, the world debated its fate. In 1952, the United Nations decided to federate Eritrea with Ethiopia, recognizing its distinct identity but trying it to Ethiopia under one crown. Eritreans accepted this compromise at first, but soon saw it stripped away. By 1962, Emperor Haile Selassie forcibly annexed Eritrea, dissolved its parliament, and treated it as a province. For Eritreans, this was not unity, it was occupation. That act ignited a 30-year war of independence, one of the longest and bloodiest struggles in modern Africa. When the Derg overthrew Haile Selassie in 1974, Eritreans continue their fight against this new Marxist-Leninist military regime. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front, EPLF, fought side by side with Ethiopia's Tigray People Liberation Front, TPLF, to topple the Derg. Yet Eritreans always made it clear their struggle was not for reforming within Ethiopia, but for independence from it. By 1991, the Derg collapsed, and Eritrean fighters entered Asmara victorious. 2 years later, in 1993, Eritreans voted in a United Nations supervised referendum. The outcome was overwhelming. 99.8% chose independence. The world recognized Eritrea as a sovereign state, and even Ethiopia's transitional government, led by the TPLF-dominated EPRDF, under the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, accepted the result. But the acceptance was fragile, and beneath it lay deep bitterness in Ethiopia. Some Ethiopians argued that the referendum was a betrayal, that they were not consulted, and that Eritrea's independence robbed Ethiopia of its coastline. Eritreans countered that international law and the African Union Foundation principles is clear. Colonial boundaries must be respected. If other African states, even those with artificial colonial borders, could retain their sovereignty, why should Eritrea be denied? If Eritrea were not recognized, then the very principle of African independence based on colonial borders would collapse, leading to endless chaos across the continent. To take Eritrea's sovereignty away now would be to unravel Africa's hard-won stability. Ethiopians often raise the question of access to the sea. Eritreans respond with a simple truth. Geography cannot be changed. Landlocked nations exist all over the world, and they find solutions through agreements, not by denying the independence of their neighbors. Ethiopia had access to Assab and Mzua through Eritrean ports in the early years of independence, but relations soured after disputes over currency and trade rules. When the 1998 to 2000 border war erupted over Badme, the bloodshed was catastrophic on both sides, and trust was shattered. Yet for Eritreans, this war was not about ports or sea access, but about sovereignty and dignity. Ethiopia had agreed to respect Eritrea's independence, but then resisted when the Border Commission ruled Badme belonged to Eritrea. For nearly 2 decades, Ethiopia refused to implement the Algiers Agreement and the verdict of the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission, even though it was legally binding and backed by the United Nations. Eritreans see this refusal as proof that Ethiopia's leadership never truly accepted their independence in practice. Another accusation Eritrea faces is that it trains Ethiopian opposition groups to destabilize Ethiopia. Eritreans reply that Ethiopia itself has long meddled in Eritrea's affair, supporting dissent and trying to isolate Asmara from the world. When Ethiopia allies with Sudan, Egypt, or Somalia against Eritrea, Ethiopian Eritreans see it as hypocritical to accuse them of interference. The Horn of Africa is a region where alliances shift constantly. Yesterday's enemy becomes today's friend. Eritrea argues that they are unfairly painted as the spoiler, when in reality they are acting not different from Ethiopia or any other state protecting its survival. Eritreans also hear Ethiopian voice calling them a chokehold, claiming Eritrea blocks Ethiopia's natural right to the sea. Yet, Eritreans remind the world that no country has a natural right to another country's land or ports. Rights are negotiated, not imposed. Just as Ethiopia has the right to control its own territory, Eritrea has the right to control its own coastline. To erase that principle would open the door for even every stronger state in Africa to claim the land of a weaker neighbor in the name of natural rights. That road leads to endless war. The role of the TPLF complicates everything. TPLF is Tigray People Liberation Front. It was TPLF's leaders who signed off on the 1993 referendum, even though many Ethiopians now say the process was flawed. Eritreans point out that they cannot be blamed for Ethiopia's internal divisions. If Ethiopian leaders allowed the referendum, it was their responsibility to defend Ethiopian interests then, not decades later through war. Eritreans also note that some within the TPLF had their own ambitions of a greater Tigray, with map circulating that showed control of fertile Amhara and Afar lands along with the Red Sea port. Whether these maps were ever official or not, they left deep suspicion. To Eritreans, however, the key fact remains they did not create Ethiopia's ethnic federalism, nor did they decide how Ethiopia should govern itself. They pursued independence, and Ethiopia must resolve its own contradictions. Looking at today, Eritreans are aware of the pain on both sides. In Tigray, famine, destruction, and displacement are real. In Eritrea, many young people flee to escape indefinite military service, poverty, and lack of freedom. Some stay because they believe in sovereignty above all, even if life is hard. The tragedy is that both nations, tied by blood and history, continue to bleed each other dry while outsiders wait to exploit the situation. Eritreans raise provocative questions that the world must consider. If Eritreans' independence is questioned, would all African borders be reopened? If every ethnic group in Africa claimed self-determination, how many thousands of new states would appear? And how many wars would that ignite? If Ethiopia insists on reclaiming access to the sea by force, does that not set a precedent for other landlocked countries to invade their neighbors? Who benefits from this chaos except external powers eager to divide and exploit? And if Africans themselves cannot respect each other's sovereignty, how can they expect the world to respect them? Eritreans know their independence is imperfect, their government flawed, and their people divided between those who stay and those who flee. But they believe one thing firmly: their sovereignty is not negotiable. They fought too long, bled too much, and won recognition too decisively to surrender it now. To them, peace can come only if Ethiopia fully accepts Eritrea's existence as permanent and works towards cooperation instead of domination. And yet, there is another truth that cannot be ignored. Ethiopians too carry deep wounds. They see betrayal, loss, and humiliation in the separation of Eritrea. They feel surrounded, denied access to the sea, and robbed of their historic connection to the coast. They are struggling with poverty, inflation, displacement, and internal ethnic conflicts that make them question the very survival of their state. In this sense, both Eritreans and Ethiopians are victims of history and politics bigger than themselves. As a truth seeker, I cannot ignore the suffering of either side. Eritrea deserves its sovereignty, protected by international law and the principles of colonial boundaries. Ethiopia deserves respect for its struggles and a peaceful way to access trade and development through agreements, not war. Both nations have been caught in nearly a century of direct and indirect conflict, from the colonial era to the present. At times, Eritreans fought alongside colonizers against Ethiopians. At other times, they fought alongside Ethiopians against the Derg. Blood has been spilled in every possible direction, and it has to stop. The lesson is that chewing on historical pain only multiplies pain. Like a victim forced to retell her trauma again and again, the act of reopening old wounds can become worse than the original violation. The people of Eritrea and Ethiopia need to find a way to honor their past without becoming prisoners of it. Otherwise, war will remain the only language spoken in the region, and that path has already destroyed too many lives. My conclusion is simple. Peace is not impossible. Eritrea and Ethiopia can exist as two sovereign nations while cooperating as if they were one family. They can form agreements where borders remain but passports are not needed, where ports are shared through trade, and where cultures intermingle without fear. They can say to the world, if you hurt one of us, you hurt us both. We stand together even though we are apart. Such a model, could become an example for Africa, where unity does not erase sovereignty but strengthen it. I think that's the only way to survive artificial colonial boundaries. As Abebe Negash, on behalf of Ethiopian Hearts for Peace and African Hearts for Peace, I offer this reflection. Despite their differences, I sympathize with both nations for the endless wars that have consumed them. I see the complexity, the betrayal, the grief, and the humanity on both sides. And I say, with all humanity, this killing spree must stop. If Eritrean or Ethiopian brothers and sisters wish to add perspectives I did not mention here, please reach out. This is not the final word, but a foundation for dialogue. Only by telling the truth, listening with respect, and seeking common ground can peace be achieved. Thank you very much. Again, this is Abebe Negash, Ethiopian Hearts for Peace and African Hearts for Peace.